Khumbula bazali bam, 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 khumbula bazali.
That was the sound that Canadians heard when Team SA landed in Alberta, Canada. South African teams have for the last 2 months been working along with other international organizations to help with those wildfires in Canada. South Africa has been an instrumental part with the Working on Fire team. Returning to South Africa, as heroes understand, another team has already been deployed to help with the massive wildfires in Alberta, Canada. Joined now in studio by Working on Fires, Linton Rensburg and Antoinette Jini. Thanks so much. And the men and women of Working on Fire here in studio with us. Linton, I'll start with you. South Africa is regularly called on to assist, not just in Canada. You've been in projects and operations in, I think, Greece as well. And around the world, South Africa has the expertise to address what is a climate crisis, which is bringing on unprecedented wildfires in many parts of the world. Good morning, Antoinette. Good morning, Linton.
Hi, good morning, Lester. Good morning to your listeners. Yes, we've been to Indonesia in 2015. We've been to Chile in 2011. And this is now our 5th deployment to Canada. As you rightly said, we have just over 200 firefighters and a management team of 13 currently in Canada. That's Mzansi 3. On yesterday, we started with our process to start looking at our 4th team to go to Canada, and we are waiting official confirmation from the Canadian fire authorities. But yes, Lester, it's been probably the biggest deployment we've ever seen from South Africa to another country, and I'm very pleased to have with me in the studio our Western Cape General Manager, Antoinette Jini. She's been to Canada on 3 deployments. She was one of our agency representatives, which is one of our senior managers leading our firefighters in Canada. But I think, as she will probably point out to you, this was a very difficult operation. Your listeners must understand that Canada is largely a forested country. 34% of the Canada is made up of forest, and I mean they've got, next to Russia, the second most largest forests in the world, just over 300 billion forests. So the nature of the fires that I think Antoinette can speak to was quite spectacular.
I'm just looking at our screen. It's one of the 24-hour news channels talking about wildfires in Algeria, killing over 30 people as wildfires sweep over North Africa. Antoinette, why are South African fighters so sought after? And in this current climate crisis, do you see teams like the Working on Fire team going to be deployed in other parts of the world in the next while?
Good morning, Lester, and good morning to the listeners. As you indicated, my name is Antoinette. Coming to your question, why the firefighters, in particular, the Working on Fire teams, the crews, they've been trained and they are fit, they are very professional, and they are excellent in what they do. And based on the memorandum that was signed in 2019 and between South Africa and Canada to provide the resources when needed. And that was signed firstly by the late Minister Edna, and we just building that relationship. We promise to provide resources when there's a need, and particularly our firefighters that are very well trained in wildfire and forestry, and they are excellent in what they do.
The South African landscape is very different from the Canadian one, and we used to seeing Working on Fire and other agencies working on particularly fynbos fires here in South Africa. What makes the terrain so different in Canada, but at the same time that South African firefighters are so readily prepared for?
the terrain and the type of fires in Canada. Here in South Africa, we do direct attack when we fight fires. Whereas in Canada, mostly our teams, our crews were basically doing hot spotting. If I'm talking about hot spotting, is the type of mopping they do. They dig they put water, they use more water as compared to our fire. And the intensity of the fire in Canada is huge than what we normally use to in South Africa.
So we come with the beaters,
we come with the beaters here. There we come with a tool, and then you dig, you put water, and you will notice that there's mostly ground fires in Canada. There's ash pits where you can walk up to this height, and you go in and you find there's fires on the ground, and their roots, they're very shallow, and you'll see our trees, there's spruce, like the pine is different than the pine here in South Africa. Their roots are very shallow, and they burn underground and they spread. And the mopping up is completely different than what we say mop up in South Africa. As we mop up one day, we are done there. We mop up for days, and they do grading to make sure that the fire is contained, and you work on perimeter. And there's these guys, they walk like over 15 kilometers a day gridding the fire line. So if I say the word gridding, is sometimes we call here patrolling, but you grid and you look at the smoke and you feel with your hands. If you see something white, you must know that is fire. If it's black, that means it's dead. So the experience and the terminology in terms of the FDI, in terms of their feather, their fuel types. So we became to learn many things in terms of their fire behavior. Some of us and myself, we also did a training with CFC in terms of
become experts on
become the experts.
So you can train other countries.
So that next time I don't go with a crew, I go as a management team, so that I can be able to take my crew, my South African crew, and be able to fight the fires with the skill that I've learned. And management is also enrolled in that courses online on Canadian fire behavior.
Linton, South Africa has a lot to offer the world, and we offer our assistance, whether it be in Africa and peacekeeping missions, whether it be in Canada and other parts of the world with firefighting missions. We contribute a lot despite our own negativity on our own country, and that negativity runs deep in each one of us here in the studio. But this is actually something where South Africa is often called on. You have the expertise. You guys have this active firefighting program run through a EWP program, but we need your help, and you're often answering the call when it comes to international operations.
Yes, that's true, Lester, but I think we need to celebrate these young men and women in the Working on Fire program. What your listeners must understand, that these young men and women previously unemployed, and because of the EPWP program of our South African government, they were trained, they developed as professional firefighters. So for many of them, the trip to Canada, it's a life-changing experience. Antoinette, that's speaking to us here, has been to Canada on 3 different occasions, 2015, 2019, and now again. But I think the important thing for us to celebrate is, as South Africans, it is not over yet. The fact is that these fires are still burning, and climate change and global warming. We've seen the fires in Europe. We've seen now in parts of Africa. We can expect much more intense fires, much more longer fires. But I think, just lastly from my part, I think what our listeners must also understand, the type of fires that Antoinette spoke about. So underground fires in Canada, the peat fires that we're talking about, is something completely different from what we experienced in South Africa. When it rains in South Africa during a fire, we pack up, we go. When it was raining in Canada, they couldn't pack up and go. They had to stay on the fire line because of those underground fires.
I've watched a lot of broadcasts from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I have a friend who's also a journalist in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, and over the last few weeks been sending me either clips or links of South African firefighters.
Yes.
We are well received. What do you think South Africans, we sing, we dance, and we laugh through our problems and our crises.
Yes.
And you guys are attending to a crisis in Canada. But what do you think it means? And what do you think is that South African, that
gift.
grigio that we go
Yes.
in, we're going to
We
fight,
go
but we're going to
in,
sing?
We go in, we do what we do, and we do what we best, which is firefighting, and with the passion, with the emotions, and because when we sing our songs, it motivates us, because sometimes we are far away from home, and Canadians will say that we didn't just bring their support, they only bring peace, because they were touched by the music that we were singing as these young men and women were singing there. And on top of that, we came with 0 injuries. That's one thing. We had 0 injuries recorded during our deployment, which means that we are really the best in what we do.
Well, Antoinette Jini, thanks so much for joining us. Linton Rensburg, working on fire, and the men and women. Yeah, I'm going to ask you for a small little song to take us out. What would you do when you come back from a fire? What would you sing?
Baba nega bandu babe